And tonight on PM Express, a conversation about Ghana reaching a staff-level agreement with the IMF. This is the fourth step, we're told, with one more step, which is the Executive Board approval for the IMF to release the $3 billion loan facility for 3 years. Now, government's domestic debt restructuring, as you may have followed, plays a key role in getting us to the next level, but with fierce resistance from all angles, including the labor front. Is government likely to pull through? Well, the IMF says the money will hit our accounts as soon as the approval is given. How soon is this approval? 1 month, 2 months? When? Well, let me break it down for you so you understand where we are exactly. So today, we are told that the extended credit facility will happen anytime soon. This is where we are, staff level agreement, and that has been reached. If you heard the IMF team lead, he explained to us that this is where we are, but we will need an approval from the executive board to get a $3 billion loan facility, and then that will be for 3 years. Now, the program is supposed to do a few things in our economy, and you heard the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, talk about it, and he says it's supposed to restore the macroeconomic stability, restore the debt sustainability by a comprehensive debt restructuring. You may have seen that government has announced a comprehensive debt restructuring to protect the vulnerable by strengthening social safety nets. And again, the Finance Minister in the 2023 budget talks about increasing LEAP and other supports for the vulnerable. Now it says it's supposed to preserve the financial stability. Now the reform program is also aimed at addressing structural weaknesses to enhance resilience to shocks, increase domestic resource mobilization, and streaming expenditure for fiscal consolidation. There's also been conversations about government expenditure. How does this factor in here? But look at the economic indicators before an IMF program. Now, we're going to be doing a comparison between 2015, at least that was the last time we went there, versus 2022 as we're going right now. So in 2015, inflation was at 16.76%. And if you look at the current status in October, as at the time we went to the IMF, the inflation was at 40.4%. Now look at the cedi. The cedi had depreciated by 16.9%. Currently, that was in 2015. Now, if you talk about today, at the time we started the IMF negotiations, the cedi has depreciated at 60%. Today, as we talk, the cedi is appreciating a little, so it's come down to 54.2%. Now, public debt stock in 2015 was 88.4 billion cedis. Talk about now is 476.4 billion Ghana cedis. So that's the comparison. Debt to GDP ratio in 2015, 66.1%, and now 75.9%. Same thing, external debt portfolio. 52.1 billion, which is 39.1% of our GDP. That was in 2015 when we decided to go to the IMF. Now come to today, as we are negotiating with the IMF, we are 271.7 billion, which is 44.1% of our GDP. Now, debt sustainability analysis. At the time in 2015 when we were going, it was said that our debts were sustainable. Today, you've seen a further downgrade by Moody's to a further junk status, and it says that our debt is unsustainable. Now, if you look at our cross-international reserves, and of course, as the cedi depreciated, is one of the conversations we were having. Now, in 2015, it was at $4.8 billion. Now we have $6.7 billion. But look at this. At the time, we had 3.2 months. That was how 4.8 billion could cover us. But even here, we have 6.7 billion. But you look at how many months we have is 2.9 months for the 6.7 billion to cover us. Now look at months of import cover, and you have 3.2% at the time in 2015 against 2.9 right now. This is the explanation of it. So the import and export put together, this is the difference you get in 2015, which was $865.4 million at the time in 2015. Now look at the difference here. It's $3.4 billion. If you look at 2015, the $865.4 million gave us a negative 2.2% of our GDP. Today, the $3.4 billion gives us negative 5.1% of our GDP. So the staff level agreement, what does this mean? It says that it is subject to the executive board's approval. The approval also depends on the receipt of the necessary financing assurances by Ghana's partners and creditors. And as you may have known, the restructuring program has been met with fierce resistance. What are the timelines? According to the leader of the IMF, he says that he cannot give specific timelines, but he says that the money will hit our accounts as soon as there's approval from the board. So today, the finance minister has been, tapping government at the back. Himself, leader, he says there's been speed at the staff level agreement, and it's a miracle and quite historical. He's urging all stakeholders to be on board. He's asking Parliament to pass the budget and all measures as early as possible. And he says that he's confident it will turn out in our favor. Now, domestic bondholders will exchange their instruments for new ones. And this is where the confusion has been since government announced its restructuring program. So it says that it will be exchanged for a set of 4 new bonds maturing in 2027, 2029, 2032, and 2037. And this is the percentage. If you're going in for the 5 years, that's or medium term, then you have 0%. If you're going for 2024, 5%, and 2025 until maturity, you have 10%. This is the breakdown. So the short bond and intermediate bonds are those that are going for 2 years, 5 years. Now, if you want to go longer, that is 10 years, 15 years, up to 2037, then you can go in for 25% or 41%, and those are the interest percentages. So there's been resistance from the restructuring program, and the restructuring is key to the IMF negotiations. You've heard the Ghana Insurance Association, you've heard the Ghana National Association of Teachers, NAT, you've heard TUC, and you've also heard other stakeholders who say there was no negotiation. Well, government says it's negotiating further to ensure that things go well for government. Tonight, I've been joined by Professor Godfred Bokpin. He's an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Dr. Kasia Latofo-Singh is minority spokesperson on finance and MP for Jumaku Enyan ACM constituency. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Thuy Champo, an economist and political risk analyst. Let's have a conversation after this break. Thanks so much, gentlemen. Let's start with your reactions to what has happened today, especially hearing from leader of the IMF team from the horse's own mouth that $3 billion will hit our accounts immediately. The executive board approves the deal. But, I mean, this is just staff level agreement. The question is, what does this mean to, our negotiations? What does this mean to the current debt restructuring? And also, what does this mean to our quest to stabilize the economy? Professor Godfred Bokpin, Dr. Kasia Latofo-Singh, and Dr. Thuy Champo, thank you so much for your time. I want to start with you, Professor Bokpin. What's your reaction to what has happened today?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you for having me here. And good evening to my co-panelists, my boss, Dr. Thuy Champo, and Honorable Dr. Thuy. So I think that this represents the first major breakthrough for us as a country. If you look at the speed with which the IMF approached or responded to the call, it was a distress call, right? It was a distress call that was placed on the 1st of July And the IMF responded quite positively. I mean, they were already in town within 1 week of the call. They have demonstrated their commitment, and so far they've worked around the clock in reaching staff level agreements, broadly outlining the framework in terms of the fiscal adjustments, structural reforms, inbuilt program monitoring mechanisms, and all of that. But we do know that a staff level agreement is not the same as a program. Okay, and the reason now we've had to pause at the staff level agreement is because of the certain prior actions that have to be taken, because largely our debt is unsustainable. In the time past, when we had gone to the IMF with pretty sustainable debt level, right from staff level agreement, the next level was the IMF executive board. But now, because of the nature of our debt and the need for some kind of debt restructuring and other prior actions, now this may delay before the staff level agreement goes to the board. So what it means essentially now is that even though this conveys positive news to the markets, right, that Ghana has demonstrated, right, some level of commitment, attachment that it would embark upon in the next 3-4 years or so. But what it also means is that it now shifts the burden to the government now, because the IMF has done its part, taking us to staff level agreement. Now it's up to us as a country to do the necessary other things in order for the staff level agreement to go to the fund. So there's a lot that we have to do. So it doesn't suggest that we have to go and pop champagne or whatever. The more difficult things are now going to be done. Because if you look at the way the staff level agreement works, is between the IMF and authorities, right? But now the other things that have to be done would involve third parties. It would involve creditors buy-in, right? Both domestic and then external. And already government's first level attempts to restructuring the domestic debt has actually backfired, right? The approach was completely wrong. The terms are too lopsided. And therefore, that pushback in itself tells you that there's a lot more work that has to be done in getting stakeholders involved. But because this involves trading of money, right? People's hard-earned money. People traded off consumption over the years in order to invest in government securities because they want to consume more in future. But now what is happening is that people are actually seeing their money actually going, right? Already inflation has reduced it to negative return. Market to market has already imposed some haircut on them. So perhaps the question is, should it get worse than this? But that is where we are. A certain level of haircut seems unavoidable. But government should accommodate investors in choosing the style of the haircuts that they would want to have. That should also not be an imposition. Essentially, what I'm saying is that some level of discussion, consultation is needed. The debt exchange in its current form is actually weakening systematically the balance sheet of the participating financial institutions. Thank you.
Thankfully, Ato Forcing is on this panel, and he is in Parliament. Now, we are told that this is we just have another hurdle to cross, then we can get approval from the executive board, then we can get the 3 billion. But we don't know when this hurdle will be crossed. But from now till the time we get the full program running, do you know if there will be some reliefs for Ghanaians?
Aisha, to start with, I've always said that a journey of 100 miles begins with a step. Today, the Republic of Ghana has made the first step. It is indeed commendable, but it is not worth celebrating. I say this because the heavy liftings have just begun. It is now time for the people of Ghana, particularly the public, the government, to start taking action. It's not about talk anymore. The ball is in their court for government to take a decision. And you could see in the statement that was read, and if you look at the paragraph that talks about the support, and it's clear, it says that to support the objective of restoring public debt sustainability, the Ghanaian authorities have announced a comprehensive debt restructuring. Sufficient assurance and progress on this front will be needed before the proposed fund-supported program can be presented to the IMF Executive Board for approval. This is on the IMF website. This simply means that until government makes sufficient progress in the debt restructuring effort, they will not be able to go to the Executive Board. And it is only until that time that obviously you can get financing or the program can actually start. And that is why I said that it is too early for us to start the celebrations. What this again means is that government will have to deepen its effort in ensuring that in the coming days, Ghana will be able to achieve some form of consensus on its debt restructuring. But unfortunately, as we are all aware, government effort has backfired. It has backfired because of government approach in dealing with the domestic debt restructuring. We are seeing a wholesale rejection of government domestic debt exchange. They have also announced that they are going to go ahead and obviously restructure the external debt. In fact, if you are to read the literatures that we are seeing, one key word that runs through is comprehensive debt restructuring. So the restructuring effort we are talking about can never be wishy-washy, cannot be a Mickey Mouse form of debt restructuring. It should be comprehensive. So that will mean you have to do domestic debt restructuring, external or foreign bond restructuring, and where possible, you may have to tackle even the bilateral debt as well in a form of probably common framework or Paris Club, can bring them together and do some form of debt restructuring. From now to the time the agreement will be reached on the debt restructuring front, it's a lot of work. You will need everybody on board. You will need everyone to agree that that is the only way we need to go. But you see, the most important bit is for government to signal that they are ready to also take part of the burden. But I'm seeing a government that is shifting all the burden to creditors and the taxpayer. I'm not seeing government trying to say that I'm also going to take part of the burden by reducing expenditure and live within my means. They are still running fiscal deficit at an alarming rate. The previous budget, if you are to compare the 2022 appropriations to 2023 appropriations that they are asking for, you are seeing 82 billion additional expenditure in nominal terms. If you look at it even in real terms, the expenditure is growing at an alarming rate. The key question is, when will government take a bold decision to cut expenditure, particularly at the governmental level? Unfortunately, we are not seeing it. But Aisha, to be very concise with the question that you asked me, I can see some form of stability going to come. But that stability will certainly be in the short term, because now everybody is going to look at something we call wait and see in the next couple of weeks. So if the wait and see does not materialize, things can get worse. And that is why the government should not just be complacent and start enjoying. The party must stop. What they should do is that they should channel their effort into action. They should act, because this stability will not last long. It will last maximum for 2-3 weeks. If by close of Friday, the debt restructuring effort becomes the domestic one fails completely, if care is not taken, the small stability we are seeing will be short-lived and it will get bad.
But from what you know, is there going to be any relief for Ghanaians?
If there is stability, obviously there will be some relief. And obviously, if we see the currency stabilizing, it is going to reflect in fuel, it is going to reflect in cost of doing business, and many others. It's going to bring inflation somewhat down, and lending rate and everything is going to. So we need to see a proper stability, okay? But what we need to be careful is that in as much as we seek stability, we should also not transfer the problem to another end. For example, you seek stability and collapse financial sector. That will bring another form of problems into the economy. So we should not just be myopic. thinking only about ourselves and be short-sighted. We should indeed confront the problem together as the people of Ghana. And that is why I'm concerned that the government approach is bad, in the sense that you are restructuring Ghana government debt, not your private debt. So the restructuring we are saying is not Kenuforiata's personal debt, it's Ghana government debt. So you need to bring everybody on board. People in the academia, civil society, political parties, we should all come together. And then obviously meet with the very creditors that you want to give them a haircut. Get them to understand that some form of restructuring is important. And then maybe accept some counter offer from them. And in the end, maybe meet them in the middle. But this approach that you are doing, patapai, you think that take it or leave it, I've never seen it anywhere in the world. I mean, we've seen countries going through domestic debt restructuring in the last 10 years. Nobody has adopted this approach that we are seeing in Ghana. I think it's something that we need to confront it. We need to tell the government that your approach is bad. Get back to the table, do a central form of economic dialogue, bring everybody on board. Let us agree that we have a problem as a country and what we can do to resolve it. But also, the government taking an action.
Dr. Thierry Champo, Ato has actually set the tone for us that if we continue on a strong path with what we are seeing, at least today we've seen the CD shaping up nicely, it's appreciating significantly. We know then definitely we are expecting that prices of goods and services must reduce. But has this got anything to do with the IMF negotiations?
Not in the negotiations itself, but it's more of the signaling that the announcement does send to the market. And like Prof. Nato has indicated, the point really has been or is that it is an important first step, but a lot more needs to be done. And the IMF has clearly indicated that they need to see sufficient assurance and progress from Ghana's partners and creditors before anything can be sent to their board for approval. So what we've been seeing in the last couple of days and even in the week since the debt exchange program was announced is more or less the market participants pricing in the expectation of the staff level program being announced, and partly a result of that is some of the stability that we're seeing currently. But it's relatively short-lived. And the reason really being, I think we have to learn lessons from other countries. So, Zambia went through a similar exercise, right? They got their staff level announced agreement was announced on the 6th of December 2021. So just about the same time as Ghana's last year. But it was not until the 31st of August 2022 before the IMF board formally approved their $1.3 billion program. So in their case, it took almost 9 months. And the reason is that they also told Zambia to actually go and work or sit down with their creditors and quote, they said that they support the Zambian authorities' effort to maintain constructive engagement with the private creditors to secure a deal on comparable terms to official creditors. And this is the important thing. They said that sufficient progress on this front will be needed before the staff level agreement can be presented to the IMF executive board for approval. So that's what happened in Zambia's case. And if you bring it to Ghana's situation, where we're talking not only external debt restructuring, but a domestic component where there's already pushback, then it becomes difficult to really see how we would be able to get all of this resolved in the next couple of weeks. So I think we're still a long way off in terms of getting the board approval.
When are we likely to see the results in terms of inflation, for instance?
Inflation is all driven by several factors. So I think really, if you look at the numbers, the current inflation levels are sort of coming down. And then we're also seeing the numbers, being further adjusted going forward. So I think we're probably at the top in terms of the inflation numbers, and the announcement or the short-term gains that we're seeing would likely be sustained going into the new year. But whether or not we can drag that or maintain this forward for a year or two, it's really more or less dependent on the formal program being announced.
So even if we get the approval, how long will it take us to get the inflation reduced?
That is the work or the remit of the central bank, and it comes down to several factors. So it's very difficult to pontificate or to forecast when inflation will start, coming down in the considerable numbers that we expect. Currently, we're sitting almost 40%. The government expects 28 or 29% for next year. I think we probably have to wait until about the middle part of next year to see the numbers start coming down.
Prof. Bokping, I'm happy that you hinted on the domestic debt restructuring because we are told that it's actually key to the negotiations. Now, you've seen the resistance that has come from all angles. I mean, the TUC, NAGRAT, NAT, UTAG, the Insurance Association. I mean, almost everyone is warning government not to touch their pension fund, for instance. There's been a lot of those who are supposed to help this restructuring program who are resisting this. That means that it can put our negotiation into jeopardy. What would our inability to get the people to sign on to the current exchange program mean to our economy?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, if you look at the literature, it's a lot more easier if you are restructuring your domestic debt component relative to the external, because of chances are that government could use through regulatory coercion, right? But I think it's down to just the approach and the manner government has gone around this. You know, there was a 5-member committee that was set up by government to interface with the banking sector in terms of debt strategy and all of that. One is wondering the extent to which the debt exchange and the terms actually did take into consideration what the committee did, right? Because I want to believe that that committee would have consulted industries widely and all of that. So if there's a huge variance between what the committee, probably through its engagement with industry, came to and recommended, and what government eventually announced, then it will seem as though government wanted to take the industry by surprise. Now, when you also read the the Attorney General's opinion and all of that, and some of the specifics you pick in there, you get the impression that there's a certain element of trying to take the market by trickery, right? In a smart way, trying to outsmart the marketing. When it happens that way, remember that those who are managing the financial institutions are all playing some kind of fiduciary role or function and all of that. And therefore, they are holding people's money in trust and all of that. The other bit that is a bit concerning is the timeline that the government gave, which almost looks as though it was compulsory. Right. So when you give that tight deadline, essentially what you are saying is that you have virtually no regard for internal processes, because this is a significant event, whether you like it or not. And some may require shareholder meeting and approval, some may require board approval and all of that. So when you throw in that uncertainty, nobody likes uncertainty. Everybody prefers relative certainty. Okay, so that was a bit troubling for me. And in fact, I would have been surprised if the participating financial institutions had just taken this hook, line, and sinker, right? They would have been bad managers. In fact, we would have concluded that they were there for themselves and for the government and not for the financial stability and not for the common good.
Correct.
Now, when you find yourself in this situation, and one thing that surprises me is how from the beginning of this year, analysts have been consistent that if you want to restructure your debt, you have to come to the table with some level of moral commanding, right, or standing, where you yourself, you would have led by leadership, by internalizing the austerity. So we had been saying that, look, reduce the size of the government, do these drastic measures. That's an important first step, so that you put that on the table. The sacrifice you are making, you put that on the table. Then you invite others to also come along and say, look, meet me halfway. But here we are, you have government keeping the same size. In fact, government is behaving as though all is normal and all of that. And yet we know that all is not well. So that itself is not helping. You must come to the table with some level of clean hands. You must come with a table demonstrating that largely I brought this upon myself. This is the level of haircut I have taken myself, and I want you to choose your style. And then we all go along, right? But that is not happening. Now, typically for the external debt, once staff level agreement has been reached, now it provides an important framework then to also engage external creditors, right, in one way or the other. But there will be the expectation will be more on achieving domestic debt restructuring because of the impact of the domestic debt in terms of how it contributes to interest costs. So more than 70%, more than 75% of the total interest costs are on the domestic debt, right?
Yeah.
And now, but typically in the literature, government is not expected to default on CD denominated debt. In the worst case scenario, they'll print more CDs. But remember, now that the IMF is in town, that is not an option to be considered. Okay. Therefore, this kind of restructuring seems unavoidable. I think government needs to regroup. Government needs to reach out and look out for people, opinion leaders, well-established people who can appeal to the two main political parties, who can also appeal to stakeholders in a way that brings all of us on board. I want to use this not as a perfect example. When the country had a Senchi consensus in 2014, you realize that one important progress that brought to us was a level of consensus on the wage bill that requires some kind of capping, right? So once you had organized labor across the various occupational groups congregating at that level with that understanding, it was then easier taking, borrowing inspiration from that to the 16th IMF program. Now, the government needs to do this because the real adjustment that is expected is yet to come, right? We are yet to open the box, the IMF box, and know what kind of adjustment government has agreed. A fund, for which reason the fund is comfortable to say that, okay, contingent on you making progress on your debt restructuring, we're going to present this to the IMF Executive Board. Remember, to restore macroeconomic stability in the short term would impose additional cost on the system. And if you check, you will see that government is already forecasting a lower growth rate in 2023 at 2.8%, the lowest in the sub-region. Actually, compared to our regional peers, our structural peers is the lowest. That means that something will give in order for us to have macroeconomic stability, because there's a price we have to pay. Unfortunately, the adverse distributional cost or effect of that tends to be disproportionately against taxpayers and households. Government would often get away with it. But I think what this presents for us going forward is that we've gone with the days where we allow politicians to have access to our tax money. And we said, do whatever you wanted to do. Now it is clear that the abuse of tax revenue is not enough. People's pensions are at stake now. So that's the very comfort of the middle class. And part of Ghana's problem over the years has been the missing middle, right? So now the middle class and the rest of them must come on board in shaping governance.
Yeah.
What we can take from all that is going on is that an IMF program is not enough in restoring macroeconomic stability on a sustainable basis. Remember, 2024 election is just around the corner. And that is why the fund is talking about front-loading the fiscal adjustment.
Yeah.
Part of that largely before the 20, because typically it is possible that in 2024, this whole 17th IMF program may be suspended voluntarily by the government until after the election, because we saw that happening in 2016. because the progress made in the first year of implementation of the 16th IMF program from April 3rd to April 2016 was practically reversed in the course of the 2016 election. And that is how come the program had to go for 1 year extension in order for it to deliver on the program objectives. So where we are now, and that is why this program, we need the main opposition party also on board because of the possibility of a regime change and the fact that we need to continue with the program. So let's build that consensus for now. Let's take advantage of this crisis to come together, build consensus across labor front, across investors, across main politics, those who are waiting to assume power, or even if the government thinks that they will win the election, we still need everybody on board. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm happy that you talked about 2015, the last time we went to IMF, but I'll come back to that in terms of timelines, because we know in 2015, the staff level agreement was announced somewhere in February, and that the main facility was announced in April or something like that. So are we to expect same timelines? Prof, I'll come back to you on that, but let me bring in Ato. Given the pace, or mindful of the pace at which this has traveled, and the finance minister himself applauded the team that this has been done, I mean, it's been fast-tracked. I mean, does this negate your, is it a feather in the cap of the finance minister, and does it negate your quest to actually remove him?
I don't think the minority have any form of regret in removing the finance minister. We believe he must go. Where we are today is self-inflicted. We are seeing what we are seeing today largely because of his ineptitude. Clearly, this is avoidable. In fact, Ghana shouldn't be here at all. We should not go through debt restructuring. Remember, people's pension, investments, lifetime savings are at risk. So this can never be compared to staff level agreement. In fact, staff level agreement for me is just an MOU, memorandum of understanding, that go and do A, B, C, D, and when you are done, you go to the board. It means nothing. So it doesn't negate the fact. He has plunged us into a major hole, a hole that will take over 10 years for us to climb back. That can never be substituted with staff level agreement. I can't clap for this. No way. But let me tell you, stability will come at a huge cost. In fact, I see growth to be the biggest casualty. And obviously, the impact on the debt restructuring, particularly the domestic debt restructuring, will have an adverse effect on economic growth and the health of the financial sector. Let no one lie to you. The fact that you are restructuring your external debt, particularly the Eurobond and that of the bilateral, if you go there, will also deny you of the needed financing for your budget. And that itself will also put your growth down. So I see growth going to go down, and I see stability going to come at a huge cost. Yes, I heard you talk about inflation, when it's going to come down. It won't just decline overnight. It will take some time. It's very easy for it to go up, but it takes a while for it to come down. Remember, apart from the fuel price and city depreciation, the government is introducing 23 different taxes. Each one of them will be inflationary. It is going to increase inflation. Yeah. So in as much as something is coming down, others is also going to go up. So it is not overnight. The kind of heavy duties we have to do will take a while. I also heard you talk about timelines. Let me be honest with you. The external debt restructuring will take a long time. In fact, it will mean that you will need at least, in my view, up to 6 months before you can get a possible debt restructuring agreement from the external side. Because the legal work you have to do is quite a lot. And aside the legal work, you will have to engage them and get them to understand.
That means we are looking at around June? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm looking at from now to June for us to properly go to the IMF board. Aside that, I know there are other prior actions from the revenue side and from the structural side the government will have to implement. So the ball is in our court. You recall that in the IMF program, yes, it was announced in February. We had board approval in April, but you could realize that we did not have to do a debt restructuring of any form before we could the IMF board. So that was fast track. This can never be the same. This one, the elephant in the room is debt sustainability. And the fact that our debt is unsustainable and you will need to do a lot more to bring your debt to sustainable level. And that is why you have to do what we call the debt restructuring. The process is not overnight. It's somebody's money. And if you want to take the person's money, you're not going to pay interest or giving the person 30% haircut as been announced by the deputy minister and the minister himself. It won't be, you don't expect them to just accept. If care is not taken from the domestic side, I'm seeing by the end of Friday a massive bond holdout. And if you have a holdout of about 90% of bondholders saying that won't sign on, it means a lot before you go to external. So the litigation and the fight is about to start. Okay. It's not yet time for us to celebrate. It is now time for us to rather be ready, engage more, and get it done properly. That's what I advise.
Dr. Theo Champo, quickly for me, what does this mean? What has happened today? I mean, we have another hurdle to cross. Atu is saying that it may take us about 6 months. But does it also mean that we'll get back on the international capital market anytime soon?
No. That's not going to happen. At least for like 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Certainly not whilst we are under a fund program, and certainly not when you're thinking of restructuring your external debt and the same people that you literally have borrowed from, you want to give them a 30% haircut or so. So that is clearly out of the question. Even the government's own budget and subsequent statement is clear that for at least the next 2, 3, you may even add even 4 years, the idea of going for Eurobonds and other borrowings is just clearly out of the question.
Professor Bourquin, so we talked about the timelines. Atu says it may take us about 6 months. But what are the factors that would influence this, even if we would have to get it earlier than that?
I think that it's within the control of government. What the president needs to do is to actually take a bold decision and downsize the size of government immediately. A lean government. You know, you need to do something to trigger confidence and a positive discussion. That then says that there's no point in me holding out. So we need that, and because there's considerable room. If you look at it, like Honorable Atu said, and then Dr. Theo Achampon, if you look at the 2023 budget, there's considerable room for expenditure-based fiscal adjustment. That will not hurt growth. Okay, so if government can do that, right, and make a bold statement along those lines, make some of the ministries. Look, if you do the calculation, we could be saving in excess of 5 billion cedis. It doesn't mean that it will plug the hole significantly, but you know, the signal effect is very, very important. And it will also contribute together with the staff level agreement. It will boost investor confidence, it will boost market confidence, and by the time you realize it's not so difficult trying to sell out a haircut to creditors. As it stands now, in fact, if you analyze the statement from TUC, you will see that TUC is not against some kind of restructuring, but I think the point is that government is doing just the minimum and is passing on the burden to investors, right? Meanwhile, if you look at the adjustment in the budget, these are all austerity. These are imposing costs, squeezing further cash flow from these same investors who are within the domestic economy, from workers, from households. Look, we are talking about the fiscal stability levy, something that was introduced as temporary. It has now become a permanent tax handle. It only changes its name, right? Now we have COVID levy, which is almost a permanent tax handle now. Now we have e-levy, the minimum threshold is gone, and all of that. So if you look at the layers of taxes, there's no breathing space You pass here is tax. You pass here is pass. If you jump, they after you. If you sit down, they after you. It's like there's no respite. And we are talking about Ghana, where the past 30, 40 years, if you analyze the narrative, it has all been sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Tighten your belt. Tighten. Our fathers tightened their belt. They died with it. We are also tightening our belt. When are we going to lose our belt and have fun one day?
It looks like we will suffocate one of these days.
Okay, so there's you sit in trotro, there's no rest. You sit in your private car, there's no rest. You are in the air, they're after you. Okay, but I think where we are, we all recognize that there's a huge price we have to pay to come out of this. But it will help all of us if government will lead by example. This government size, you cannot go to a restructuring table and you will generate confidence. No, you will not. Mr. President, this is an honorable appeal to you. Reduce the size of your ministers. 6 years of political return with you is more than enough. Leave a legacy for Ghana now. For once, let us go to bed knowing that we have a president who is leading by example.
I'm grateful, Professor Bokpin. He's with the University of Ghana Business School. Dr. Keselato forcing, this is something that would continue in Parliament because the Finance Minister has asked all stakeholders to help push this. And he says Parliament should pass the budget and all other measures as early as possible. So this is something we'll be watching out how it pans. Dr. Theo Champo, I'm grateful for your time this night. Let's have this conversation again because it's just started. Viewers, thank you so much for watching. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. Enjoy the rest of our programs.